Simon.
Hey, Simon.
Hello, Simon.
Hey, Simon.
What's up, Simon?
How you doing?
Hello. Hey, Simon. It's Skylar. How you doing?
Hello, Simon. Hello.
Hey.
Hey there.
Simon.
Hello, Simon.
This is Conversations with Storytellers, a podcast of wisdom, thoughts, and folk and fairy tales from our community, and I am your host, Simon Brooks. This is a meeting with professional storytellers. I know there are many places to be, and I'm so glad that you're here. Margaret Read MacDonald is a retired librarian, a library in and of herself, and a storytelling legend. She has travelled broadly around the world, gathering and listening to stories from other tellers, and as a result has over 65 published books and over 13 awards for her extensive work. Margaret has an MA in Library Science, another in Education, a PhD in folklore, and is the recipient of a Fulbright Scholarship. She is also the mother of 2 storytellers. Some strange and annoying reason my mic was crackling and popping, so I apologise for that. Please welcome Margaret Read MacDonald. Margaret Read MacDonald, welcome to Conversations with Storytellers. I'm very excited to chat with you today.
I'm glad to be here.
Huzzah. You just mentioned a second ago that Read was or is your maiden name.
Exactly, yes.
And I love that because not only are you a writer, but you are also a librarian. Are you still a librarian? Do you still hold that capacity?
Well, I retired from the library a few years ago, but I'm still a librarian at heart. Yeah. So I used to go in the classroom and say, "I'm Miss Read. I came to tell you to read books." It's a great name for a librarian.
It is. It's one of the best. I was looking at how many books that you've written, and there's over 65.
Yeah, 67 now.
67. Wow, that's bozonkers. And you've got something like 13 awards. And I'm sure a lot of librarians and storytellers know about you because of that. You know, you've written a lot. But what was it like being Margaret Read as a child? Who were there readers in your family? Were there people that told you stories? Were there storytellers in your family?
Not exactly. My mother, I grew up in southern Indiana, and my mother was a farm girl from Scipio, Indiana, a little farming community, and she would read to me every night. And she had the whole complete works of James Whitcomb Riley, who was an Indiana poet who told in the vernacular. And she would read aloud these poems to me every night. And so I heard that language coming into my ear constantly. And then in the family that I grew up, we had good friends that we'd visit at night. And the tradition was you'd sit around in a circle in often straight back chairs, and somebody would tell, they wouldn't be folk tales, but they'd tell stories about what had happened to them. And like, going hunting, going fishing, and it was many men that were doing the storytelling. And there was one gentleman, Spiv Helt from the Scipio, Indiana community, who was the storyteller. And so everyone would defer to him and ask Spiv, and it was always, tell the one about, because there were stories that everyone had heard before and you want to hear it again because he told it so well. So it was all about performance as an art, the storytelling. Right. So I actually wrote a book about him, or about Scipio, called Scipio Storytelling.
Right.
That I put.
That looked like a huge project.
It was a massive project. And I did it over a period of about 10 years, because whenever I'd go back east to a storytelling conference or a folklore conference or a library conference, I'd stop over in Indiana and spend a few days or maybe even a week there with my tape recorder. And I had like 300 hours of tape that I transcribed. That's back in the days when you had a little machine and you'd push a button with your foot and it would run and you'd type a little bit and then push the button and type a little bit more. So
wow. So was this just like stenographers type of recording equipment?
Yeah. You could buy a little machine that you could put your tape in and make it go forward with a foot pedal, so you could be typing. Yeah. So it was a massive project. So I actually transcribed all those tapes, and then but what I wanted to do was this book I had a PhD in folklore, and this is my community. So I wanted to do, like, as a member of the community, do this folkloric examination of their storytelling style. And that's what I wanted to do, and what I did in the book, Scipio Storytelling. But the folks who lived there, that isn't what they wanted. They wanted a history of Scipio. So I ended up doing this massive, in-depth history of the community that I published. I published that one at my own expense, essentially, and then the church ladies sold it. So first I had to get through that hurdle before I could get down to doing what I really came to do. And then when I finished this book about Scipio storytelling and sent it back to my host family, Spiv Helt and his wife Esther, Esther didn't like it because Spiv had said things about going to church that she didn't approve of. And I asked him, what happens when you die, Spiv? What do you think happens when you die? He said, why, you rot. I mean, he was a farmer. That's what,
Yes.
he could see that. And Esther, being a very, stout churchgoer, they're just not happy. And so I asked Spiv, well, can I go ahead and publish it? And he said, I really wouldn't want to hurt Sissy. He called her Sissy. And so I waited until she passed away. I waited about 10 more years before I published it. I didn't want to offend them.
Yeah.
But it finally got published. Yeah.
Good. And how long did that take you to create? That must have taken you like years and years.
Oh, years. Yeah, years. 10 years at least, more.
And I did read that
I'm in it for the long. I have been in it for the long run. At
You
this
have.
point in life.
So I saw that you got a degree in anthropology, and then the storytelling kind of like came out of that. Is that right?
I got a degree in anthropology, right? Because that was, in college I just kept changing majors every semester until the last semester I looked and saw what I had the most credits in, and it was anthropology. So I went ahead and made that my major.
That's awesome.
And then I joined the Peace Corps, and then before I finished training, I had met this young man who was a bibliophile, and I had never met a bibliophile before. I was from Indiana, a little tiny town, and I never met anyone like that. He just had piles of books. He was reading them to people all the time, and rooms to the ceiling with books, and so I ran away to Reno and eloped and married him.
Oh, really?
I had to either go to the Philippines for 2 years or marry him. I known him 10 days, and I had to make the decision. And so I decided, well, I'll never be another bibliophile like this. I have to marry this guy. So we ran off to Reno and got married. Almost killed my parents.
Well, I was going to ask you that, because, Sissy, and she didn't like what her husband was saying. What did your parents say about that?
Oh, they were just horrified. Yeah. They were very, very unhappy I'd done it. So then I was stuck in San Jose, California, living with Bob, my husband, and it didn't work out. So after a few months, that was August, and by Christmas, that was over with. So I didn't want to go home in disgrace. So I had a job typing catalog cards at the library, and I saved enough money for a flight to Hawaii to go to the University of Hawaii to go to school. Right. And I got over there and was so messed up that I couldn't cope with that and had to come home in disgrace eventually anyway. But then I went back to school to become a librarian because as a librarian, it doesn't matter what you're interested in. It's part of your career.
Right.
You can spend your time reading about anything because somebody's going to come into the door and ask you a question about that. So, and I was going to be an anthropological librarian, and I took all the courses to do that, and I was all set. And then summer came, and I could take 3 more classes. I could take anything I wanted to take. And I said, I'm just exhausted from all these, in-depth courses that I've been taking. I'm going to just have fun and take kitty lit and storytelling because that would just be a fun summer. And that's what happened. And so I had a teacher who was actually in charge of children's work at the King County Library System in Seattle, where we were. And so the last day of storytelling class, I went in and I told my first big story, long story ever that I'd learned for my final assignment. But coming across campus, to go to campus that day, he and I met, the professor and I met. He was coming one way and I another way, and we just kind of met on the trail. And he said, "Aren't you in my class?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Oh, you're going to be a children's librarian." I said, "Oh, no, I'm going to be an anthropology librarian." He said, "Oh, you should be a children's librarian." He started to rant and rave about the wonderful wonders of this profession. And I said, "It's too late. I don't have any classes in that field except yours. I don't even know the advisor who was in charge of children's lit here at the library school." He said, "Oh, come to King County. We can train you. It's no problem." And I said, "Oh, I think it's too late. I should have started early to do that." And went into class, and I told my first ever story, long story.
Right.
And at the end of the story, he leaped to his feet and he called, "Miss Read, you've got to become a children's librarian."
That's
awesome. And I went down the next day and he hired me and trained me.
That's awesome. What was the story that you told?
The Fast Sooner Hound.
Okay.
And it's a story about this dog, the Sooner Hound, who he'd sooner run than eat, he'd sooner run than sleep, he'd sooner run than do most anything. And he belonged to a fireman on a train. And now I tell it as if it happened in my hometown, because when I told it to my parents, my father said, "Well, that's a true story. Happened to old Joe Sutter, lived down here by the railroad track." And I got it out of a book, of course. So in the book, which is published for children, the train is going so fast, wheels are coming off. And so the dog runs up and down, tightening the bolts, and saves the train. But in the real story from Northern Indiana, where I grew up,
right,
Joe Sutter's dog, the train got to hot boxing, which was when they go too fast. The axle was a wooden box, cotton caulking all around it, and oil. That's the way it was in the old days. And if it got going too fast, that caulking would get on fire. And it was called hot boxing, and the whole box would get on fire. And they had to stop the train and put it out. The dog saw it, and he was running up and down alongside the train, putting out the fires.
Oh, wow. That's cool. Yeah, your version sounds very Hanna-Banana-ish. Hanna-Barbera, I should say. Always call him Hanna-Banana. I don't know why. But yes, that's...
Anyway, so that's how I became a children's librarian. And then in those days, a children's librarian had to be a storyteller. So
right.
I was telling stories.
And the way that you found your stories was interesting.
Well, the stories that I found were mainly stories collected by other folklorists, anthropologists. Mm-hmm. And so every spring, I had to go into 10 different schools and tell stories to invite the kids to our summer reading program at the library. Mm-hmm. And I would tell stories in every single class. I'd go in the morning at 9 and tell until 3 in the afternoon. In every single class, I'd tell stories. And I'd go up to the University of Washington Library with my big canvas bags, and I'd fill them full of books that looked like they had stories I might be interested in, and haul them home in April and read through them all and pick out the ones that I was going to try out. And then I'd learn one new one every night and tell it the next day at all those classes. If it was a keeper, I'd keep it and I'd go home and type it up. If it wasn't, I'd let it go. And then if I had a keeper, next day I'd try a different story. And that's how I shaped all the stories that are in my collections, just by telling them.
So you would read from a collection of stories that night, and then you would tell them the next day. That's incredible. How would you I mean, I have to play with a story quite a lot before I dare to tell it out loud. That's incredible.
Well, no, because it isn't right the first time you tell it, but you keep telling it. And through telling, it shapes itself because the audience triggers you how it should be going.
Right.
And if you told it all day to these different age levels, by the end of the day, it's shaped itself.
I suppose, yeah, I can see that.
Of course, the way I was trained, or the way librarians were normally trained in those days, was you had to memorize the story and practice it before a mirror and practice it over and over and over before you got up in front of kids and told it. But I broke with that rule and just went for a jump in and start telling and see what happens.
Good for you. That's awesome. I love that. I love that. So when you were telling, you would tell these stories like over and over again to these groups, and then you would refine them, and you said you would put these in your collections.
Yeah, yeah. And then if I was going to do it as a picture book, of course, then I would refine it much, much more carefully, because as a picture book, it had to be worded in such a way that any random father can pick it up and read it, and it's going to sound just perfect orally, like it was, it's going to sound beautiful no matter who reads it. So I had to be really careful with the language for a picture book, and I would read those, and then I'd paste it up with the illustrations and read them over and over again to groups of kids, and then I would give it to some friends of mine who were not librarians or teachers, who didn't know how to read to kids, and have them read it and see how. And if it didn't come out right, I know I had that spot I got to work on, because that spot didn't come out right.
Yeah.
So that would be my final check on those to make them absolutely perfect.
That's awesome. So would you consider yourself a writer first, or a storyteller first, or a folklorist
Storyteller.
first? Yeah. Okay.
No, storyteller.
So I was in my readings. I was looking at your dissertation, or the beginning of your dissertation, the Storyteller source book, because that is quite a feat for the people that are listening that don't know what that is. This is a book that was originally published in 82. Is that right? 1982.
Correct.
And it is a resource where you have indexed stories and picture books by motif, subject, title, ethnic group, origin, and it includes a bibliography of those books. Is that correct? And
That's correct. 800 pages.
Yeah, and it's not big text.
No.
800 pages of small.
Years.
How many?
10.
That's a long time.
Yeah. That's before computers.
Right.
That's before computers. So it had to all be done on index cards and loose leaf notebooks. And the reason I wanted that index was because as an anthro major, I had used the Smith Thompson Motif Index to Folk Literature. And that's an index to all kinds of obscure collections that you'll find at the university libraries. But I wanted a book just like that for children's collections. So I thought I could do that. And so I started working on it, and then I thought, gee, this is going to be a project. This could be a PhD dissertation. So I contacted Richard Dorson at the Indiana University, and he agreed that it could be a dissertation, and took me into the PhD program, and I did it. But first I got the PhD, and then I kept on working on this thing and working on this thing and working on this thing to get it finished. I mean, to actually finalize the degree. And the whole thing took 10 years from start to finish.
That's incredible. That is a labor of love. I mean, it
definitely
to be.
was. It definitely was.
Yeah.
And then many years later, 10 years later, Brian Sturm at Indiana University, he was a student there, and he contacted me, and he wanted to do a supplement to it. So he and I did that together. And by then we had computers, and so Brian put it on his computer.
Right.
And he had graduate students helping index the books, as well as he and I. And so that one took, I think, 2 or 3 years. It was a much quicker project.
Oh, I bet. That's incredible. That is such a, I mean, that's an incredible source that you've given everybody here. So you've got a degree in anthropology, you got a folklorist degree.
PhD in folklore. Mm-hmm.
Right. And you have a master's in library science. You have a master's in education, early childhood communications, and the PhD in folklore, and you got a Fulbright scholarship as well. How did you get hold of that?
Everything is serendipity in my life. It's like meeting Bob Polishuk crossing the campus at IU. Otherwise, I'd be an anthropology librarian now if that moment hadn't occurred.
Yeah.
So I was sitting at my desk in the library, at the library one day, and the phone rang, and it was a professor from a university who said, Dr. Oyupatosa in Masakram, Thailand, wants you to call her. She'd like you to come there as a Fulbright scholar. And I was like, what? Say what? Can I do that? And so I called her right away. Of course, it was like 3 a.m. in Thailand, and she's like, what? That she had, I had written a collection of Thai folktales with a friend that I worked with in the library who wanted to do a collection of Thai folktales. So I had helped her with that. And so Anne Pulaski, who's a highly traveled storyteller, had been in Thailand doing a workshop, and Anne had seen that book. And so Mayupa asked Anne if she would come and be a Fulbright scholar. And she said, no, I can't do that, but I know who you ought to get, and gave her my name. So I did have to apply and jump through a lot of hoops, but I ended up going to Mazarkam for 2 years in a row in the winter to teach her students tell stories, and then go with them into 19 school districts, not actually districts, but provinces in Thailand. It's called Isan, the area, and it's northeastern Thailand.
Yeah.
So if you look at Thailand, it's kind of like an elephant head. There's a big ear here is Chiang Mai, and down below the snout is Phuket, and Bangkok's where the mouth is, and then the other ear is Isan, and it's this big kind of barren plain. It's I guess kind of like Nebraska, maybe.
Okay.
Not like it's not like you imagine Thailand being.
Right.
And the area actually is Lao speaking, or was Lao speaking. It's actually ethnically Lao, but it's actually the borders are drawn, so it's part of Thailand. And Ajahn Mayupa was really concerned because the children in the area don't speak Lao anymore and don't know Lao folk tales, and have lost their culture because everything is Bangkok Thai. Radio, school, everything has to be Bangkok Thai. And so they've actually lost their culture. So she thought of storytelling as a way to bring that back to life. And she wanted her university students to learn Lao folk tales and go out into these 19 provinces and tell these Lao folk tales.
Oh,
in Lao.
Wow. That must have been really powerful.
It was amazing. And
how did you find these stories? Did you find elders in the communities to tell you these stories, or where were they?
No. There had been a folklorist there at Mazarkam at some point in time who had been doing that and collecting folk tales. And at the university library, there were these mimeographed booklets of stories in Lao, in the Lao script. So of course I couldn't read them. But the folklorist had put in all the type and motif numbers, and I had brought along my index, so I could look them up and know what the story was, and know whether it would be a good story for telling to kids or not. And then I had a graduate assistant who would translate, and I would type out as she spoke them the stories that I had picked out that I knew would be a motif that might work. Then I would retell them in English in a tellable format, and Ajahn Mayupa would retell them in Lao from my telling. And then she and I would tend and teach them to the students, and then we'd go out and they would tell them, would act them out and perform them.
That is so cool.
Quite a job.
Yeah, sounds like a lot of these things that you do, they're not little things. They're huge.
Oh, they're really massive. And she became a great storyteller and continued after I left to tell stories. And one of her students became a very strong storyteller, and they had a storytelling house in Mazarkam where they'd bring in students and keep on teaching. And she ran festivals there several times and brought in people from all over Southeast Asia and made connections with people. She was amazing. And she passed away a couple of years ago.
Oh, that's too bad.
Way too. Yeah.
So how did you? So you collected you started off making collections of books, am I right? Or collections of stories? Sorry.
Right.
And then
the index came first.
Right.
And then because of the index, I had made a lot of connections with publishers who had turned it down, because 10 publishers turned it down over the years. But I got to know them, and they got to know me. So then later, when I had another book, it was not 8 pages long, and because in those days they were setting type by hand, it was incredible. So anyway, they all turned it down, 10 of them, 9 of them turned it down.
Yeah.
But I had met them. And so when I had another book idea, then I could go to them and get it published, because you got to have connections to get things published. It doesn't just happen.
Yeah, that's what I'm finding.
Yes, yeah.
A lot of rejection letters. Oh, actually, a lot. These days, you don't get rejection letters. You just get crickets. It's just like silence. It's like nothing. So, all right, send it out again to someone else.
Well, I'll tell you. I think over the years I've gotten about 500 rejection letters. Seriously, because I just kept sending things out, I just kept sending things out over and over and over again, and the picture books in particular. It could be the 15th time that I'd finally get it published.
And each time you get a rejection, you would rework the story a little bit, or
sometimes I'd look at it again, but I wouldn't always rework it. Sometimes I would, sometimes I wouldn't. But try a different publisher. No, I just had a list of publishers that I was trying, and then I had an index card for each book, and I'd write down who I sent it to, what they'd said. And then I'd put it in the mail for the next one, and then who I'd send it to. And I wouldn't let them pile up. I just keep sending them back out again.
That's awesome. That's really cool. I love that. And nowadays you don't do the card system because we have email, right?
No, I still have my card system, but I've kind of given up on it, because what happens is that at my age, my editors have all retired, so my personal connections are broken with the publishing houses.
But you're still a bit of a legend, though.
Yeah. But it gets harder when they don't know you personally, and because in the past they were, I could feed them the next book, and they might not choose that one, but they'd choose something eventually for my next book.
Right.
And then, so it's become more difficult.
Okay, so do you think that the book industry is like pulling away from folk and fairy tales?
Yes, I think so, definitely. Yeah.
And you still believe that we need to keep these folk and fairy tales being published and put out there?
Definitely, yeah. Because the books that are out there don't stay in print forever. And if you don't have more coming, then gradually they just kind of vanish into the Netherlands.
Yes. Let's hope
and it's
not
really
the
important. These yeah. But these folk tales are really important. They're great stories and bring great joy to listeners, and a lot of them have great morals and to teach you how to live and how to behave. But maybe they're just plain fun, and they need to be told and performed.
Yeah,
not just read, but told and performed.
Yeah, I feel the same way about that.
And they are being, we have tons of storytellers around the world, not just in the U.S., but all over. Storytelling is really alive.
Yeah, it is. Do you think the style of storytelling in Thailand is different from American storytelling?
No, not really.
Because you've traveled to a lot of different places. I mean, not just Thailand, but you've been to Japan, and you've moved from Washington. Well, you're in Washington State right now, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's been your home for a long time.
Yeah.
Was that a big move, a big shock, moving from a small town in Indiana to someone like Seattle?
With the big shock that I already mentioned was going to San Jose, California, and running off to get married with the first
I suppose so.
I met. That was the
I guess Seattle will be a bit easy after that, right?
Yeah.
But you've been California, Singapore, Maryland, Thailand. We talked about Washington State and Japan. So I mean, you're really well traveled, and you've been to like a whole host of other countries as well. Do you think there's much? Do you think styles and are different, and also the way storytelling is viewed is that different in many countries, or do you feel it's the same as over here in the States?
I think it's very similar. I mean, there are, differences in different cultures with the way, and even within one culture, there are many different storytellers who have different styles.
Right.
So there are different. There are many styles of storytelling, but I think essentially the impulse to share a story and the relationship between the audience and the teller is the same, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's your favorite thing about storytelling when you're in front of an audience?
Well, to me, storytelling is all about the musicality of the language and sharing the language, and I'm always looking for stories that have chants or songs in them, repetition, which you can find especially in folktales from Africa.
Yeah.
They're
very song-like and bouncy.
Yeah.
And a lot of your books that I've read, your picture books they have that same quality of song and bounciness to them as well.
Yes, of course. Yeah, because that's what I love, and it's great fun for the teacher to read them or the parent to read them. Yeah, and the kids can take part. I really enjoy the stories that allow the audience to participate and jump in and join in with you. So it's kind of like a story play that you're creating together. So it's not just you performing, but it's you and the audience sharing this story together, and creating the shared joint experience. And to me, story is all about joy. It has to be fun, or I don't want to do it. I mean, that's why I don't tell personal stories or anything like that. I'm just into the folk tale. I know, but I think it's really, really unfortunate that our tellers today are so into their personal stories and not sharing the beauty of folk literature.
I know,
because it is literature. It's really literary. The way we take this language and mold it and shape it and bring it out of our mouths, and it has to be beautiful, or it isn't worth doing.
I would agree
and we
with
shape
that.
it to make it that way.
Right. How do you think we can get more people to listen to folk and fairy tales or read folk and fairy tales?
That really bothers me, because when I was trained as a librarian, you absolutely had to tell stories as a children's librarian. Every week it was required. You're supposed to be doing this. You had to learn it. And you had to do it. And teachers were telling stories. And if you look into the history of education, you find collections on storytelling way back at the turn of the century for teaching, how to tell stories. They would tell stories in the classroom. That was a very important part of education. And it's kind of been dropped. And then, even school librarians aren't doing it as much as they should anymore, because they're doing other things. So the whole art of telling stories to kids is being dropped by the people who should be doing it. And it's such a joyful thing and such a simple thing, and takes almost no time. In 5 minutes, you can share a beautiful story at the end of the day and just bring the group together.
Yeah.
But I've done what I could. I've done all the classes, classes whenever I can, and for teachers. And my daughter and my son-in-law are both storytellers. She's a kindergarten teacher, and he is a school librarian.
Oh, wow.
And they do tandem storytelling.
I think I might have met them once. I'd like to have them on this show and find out what it was like growing up with you as a mother, as a storyteller.
I'm sure Jane would have something to say about that. We did a book together called Teaching with Story, and it's really an incredible book that has 20 stories that are really good for use in the classroom. And I shaped the stories, and then Jen and Nat provided the commentary on how to adapt them to use in the classroom. And it makes it so obvious how you can use storytelling in the classroom. And August House published it, and it's a beautiful book. And it really hasn't sold as many copies as it should be. People aren't finding it. I don't know why, but it's.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. Yeah, I get pushback about telling scary stories to kids, but it's to me it's like how are kids going to learn to handle fear if they're not presented with it?
And we used to be able to do that all the time in the library. When I was a librarian at Bothell Library, I had a little room. Every Halloween, I'd darken it and put a big old kettle in there and do my really scary stories. and with the witch's hat and everything, and tell all this creepy stuff. I couldn't get away with it now. Things have changed.
You don't think your library, your local library, would let you do that now?
I don't know. Yeah, like Mr. Fox, Oh, that's a creepy story.
Yeah, it's a very creepy. Yeah. It's lovely. It's a good story.
Yeah, it's a good story. It's a good story. I tell it to my family still. They request it all the time.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's one of those stories that teaches people to be aware of false personalities, people that say one thing and do something else. I mean, it's one of the best. We should be telling that a lot.
Yeah.
So, you've made a few CDs as well. You worked with a musician, at least two of them, I believe.
No, just one, Richard Schultz. He's an autoharpist. And yes, and I really loved working with him. He's incredible. And you just kind of lay back on his music as you tell. And I could just, tell him where the story came from and start telling. And he'd just immediately have the absolutely right music, to back it up.
Wow.
So I went to him. We worked together quite a bit. But of course, if you want to perform and get paid, if you have two people, they got to pay you more. And then mainly he lived in Bellingham, which is like about 2 hours away from Seattle. So trying to get together to do performances isn't that easy.
Yeah, I imagine.
But, yeah, I loved working with him. That was really great. I mean, we do have the CDs, so those, I think they're out of print now, but they're great. Jenny and Nat and I had a picture book, Feisty Cinderella, that was just ready to be. It was illustrated, formatted, just ready to go to the printer, and Liz went broke and had to close the publishing house. So that was years ago. And so just this year, I just self-published it. So it's available on Amazon. It's available on Amazon in paperback.
That's awesome. And what's that called?
Because it was done. It was all done. It was ready to go.
Yeah. And if you got all the right files and everything, why not, right?
Yeah. So anyway, it's available. No one's going to find it. And you can link to that one too, because
I will.
No one's going to find it.
I'll absolutely link that one. To you. So, how do I mean? You said you made it sound very simple that your process is basically you find a story and you would take it into schools and that story would find its own voice and you would massage it and everything, and then you'd have a fine story to tell and a fine story to put into print. But you're not you retired from the library. Did you continue doing that? Going into the library and into schools and trying the stories out, or did your way of crafting the stories change?
No, yes, it would have changed after I retired. I don't know that, but since after I retired, I had a little grandson coming along.
Oh, the grandchildren.
Yes. So we have a summer home on a little island up in the San Juans, Guimas Island. And actually, you were asking about Seattle. I've been coming here since I was 6 years old, because my father came out and built a little log cabin up there, and we've been coming in the summer since I was 6. Seattle wasn't new to me, and so the whole family would go up there for weekends, at least once a month. And Murray, and I'd tell Murray bedtime stories, and his sister Matilda, but then she aged out of it. But Murray didn't age out of it. He just aged out of it this year. And he's 12. but
awesome.
He loved the story. And he wanted a new story every time we went up. It could have been a month. And he'd say, Granny Mac, you still haven't got a new story? What have you been doing? Why haven't you got a new story? So I really worked on a lot of new stories just over the last few years, trying to entertain Murray and keep him happy.
So
and then I would tell them over and over and over.
So he was your editor then?
he was my audience, and he would want them over and over again. So I might tell the same story, like
Good for
50
him.
times before. And then, so those haven't been published yet, but I just put them all together into a book that I sent to August House that they might or might not take. But if they don't, I'll try a couple other publishers, and then I'll just publish it myself because it's pretty easy to do now.
It's very easy to do now. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that with some publishing houses, you probably make more money because when you go out and do your thing, you sell them, as opposed to some of the smaller publishers hope that people come to them and buy them because they can't afford to publicize them.
Yeah. So
I have your peace book, which I absolutely love. It's really good.
I'm very proud of that one. That one came about during the first Gulf War.
Right.
Yeah, because I was so shocked that people were tying all these yellow ribbons around the trees like they were supporting the war, and I just couldn't believe it. I thought war was over.
I know,
in my
right?
lifetime at least, but yeah.
Well, yeah, we all
So I
thought
thought,
that.
what could I do? What could I do? Like, gee, I could do a collection of folk tales on things of peace. And I was working with a small publisher, Linnet Books at that time, run by husband and wife, small company. And so I sent them a proposal, and they said, "Let's do it." And within a year, the book was in print. I mean, they got it in print within a year. If I'd have gone to a big one of my publishers like HarperCollins, it would have been that wouldn't even get accepted. And these guys, because they could move fast, they said do it, and I did. And it's been very popular ever since. And it was hard to find. I looked and looked and looked, and I really wanted to find story from the Muslim tradition to include. And I had trouble finding that. I think it's because not enough things have been translated into English from Arabic, that we don't really have access to a lot of sources.
I would agree with that.
That was a story in which a man was about to kill his enemy, and all of a sudden he stopped and he thought, "No, I'm killing him in anger. That's not right." And he composed himself, and then he killed him.
There you go. Yeah,
Which, I don't know.
Yeah, it's I read a lot of Australian stories, traditional Australian stories, and so many of those were, they were. I mean, it's a harsh environment to live in, so I suppose the environment creates the stories from within, and some of them are really, really violent, and I found myself not wanting to tell those stories because it's like, I don't want to give kids nightmares. And the other thing is, I don't know if it's our narrow-mindedness that we didn't want to publish stories from Arab countries, but there are very, very few books out there. Even now, there's very few books out. There's more. But when I started looking into finding stories from the Arab culture, there was like one or two. And in fact, one of your picture books led me to one of them, and that was To Run, about the pots that would go and steal things.
Yeah.
Which, when I read that, I found the original. I was quite shocked.
Oh yes, oh yes. I certainly sanitized that.
Yes, you did. Sanitize is the right word as well. Yeah, I found it in.
And even then, I had trouble with it.
I bet. Yeah. Speak, words, speak. Yeah.
And I was emailing with the folklorists who collected the stories, Cherie and Ibrahim. They gave the okay for the changes I made and everything. But I was telling it, she was taken to a stable and they filled her horse manure.
Right.
It is a way to end. And so my editor at the publishing house said, "No, we can't do that. You have to change it, and just put in mud." And I finally I gave in and I said, okay. And so I actually had the story as the editor understood it was that she was taken to the into the garden and they filled her full of mud. But the illustrator emailed and said, can that be right? Shouldn't it be horse manure? And I said, of course it should. But she said, mud. Can you make it look kind of like horse manure and kind of like mud? And she did. And then I never used the word horse manure or mud. I said she was filled with, I don't know why I said, nya nya or, something.
Okay.
I used just words that didn't mean anything, that just meant disgust, right? Instead of, and so to this day, the editor thinks it's mud.
Yeah.
And she even was, some reviewer thought it was horse manure, and she said, I don't know why she got that idea. And I said, well, I have no idea either.
Maybe they knew the original version, or the version that was collected in Speak Bird, and was kind of like, maybe that's what they meant.
Well, no. I think if you ask any kid what it is, they're going to say horse manure. That they aren't say mud. The kids all know it's horse manure. But the editor doesn't know, and that's okay. And that's the reason that they don't want authors and illustrators to talk to each other. They don't allow you to talk to each other in the publishing industry. It's for you to gang up on it, and they don't know what's going on.
That's so funny. Oh, I didn't realize that. Yeah, this peace book's really good. I highly recommend this to our listeners. Peace Tales, World Folk Tales to Talk About by Margaret Read MacDonald. And that's an August House book.
Yeah, and then I followed that up with Earth Care, we'll just talk about, which is a collection of folk tales on taking care of the earth. And those are easy to find because every culture has stories about taking care of the earth, really interestingly. Not that many stories about how to get along with your neighbor, but lots of stories about don't destroy your habitat or you're going to die.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because that's what happens, right? I mean, that's the thing that we need to do, is to look after our environment, and that's something that multiple generations of all sorts of cultures outside of our own, sadly, have always been pushing. And then there's another book that I found that was really interesting, which was Look Back and See.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's my favorite collection.
I need to find that book because I was reading about you, and that book kind of popped out. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that book and how it came about and the whole process of that? Yes.
Well, the first first collection I did was 20 Tellable Tales, and that was very popular. And so I wanted to follow it with, and I had a collection that I was working on, and when that book came out, I was telling my husband's cousin about it. She was a kindergarten teacher. I said, I wrote a book called 20 Tellable Tales. I talk really fast and I stutter, so sometimes you get confused. And I said 20 Terrible Tales. And she said, oh, 20 Terrible Tales. My kids will love that. And I said, oh, I didn't write that book. Okay, I'll do that next. So the next one I turned was When the Lights Go Out, which was scary stories. And some are just kind of disgusting because I was originally working on a title of 20 Terrible Tales, and then the publisher made me change the title to When the Lights Go Out. So then I was teaching by this time a lot of classes to educators of storytelling. And I had this one class where they wouldn't tell any of the stories I recommended to them. Because I teach by taking the stories that I've already shaped and demonstrating them and having them work in small groups and tell them to each other. And then I demand them to go and tell a story before they come back the next week. It can be to their dog, their cat, a group, their family, but they got to go tell the story out loud, and then come back. And every week they get another story. So by the end of 10 weeks, they've told 10 stories and they're hooked. That's the idea.
I think it's a good one.
So because especially if they're in a school and they're actually telling the stories in their classroom, or as a school librarian, once they've told stories for 10 weeks, they're identified in the school as the storyteller. And now they can't get out of it.
Yeah.
They're stuck. And so they assume the identity of a storyteller. And then once they assume the identity, they'll continue. That's my theory, and that's the way I taught anyway. So anyway, but then I had this one class that they wouldn't tell anything. They said, no, that's not moral. Jack and the robbers, they stole the money. That isn't any good. Money wasn't theirs. And this wasn't good. Anything I taught them, one would tell, no. I said, okay, I've got to do a collection of, stories that don't have anything they can complain about. So that's where Look Back and See came from. So all the stories were things I thought that they couldn't find any fault with. They weren't scary. They weren't immoral. They were just plain fun. But they're really strong audience participation stories, all of them, and I love them. Yeah.
And they're gentle. There's no violence in them or anything, right?
They're gentle. Yeah.
That's what I liked about the title. 20 lively tales for gentle tellers. Yeah, I like that one.
So hopefully it works. I'm sure they'll find something, but anyway, that was the idea.
There's always someone that can find something to complain about, that's for sure. Yeah. For you, what is the most important part of what you do?
The most important part of what I do is providing tellable stories that other tellers can pick up and can tell easily, which will hopefully encourage them to tell. Because what I really would like to have is all teachers, all librarians out there telling stories to the kids constantly, telling stories every week, telling stories. And I'm giving them easy text that they can read them 2 or 3 times, put the book down, and go tell them without a lot of fuss and bother. And so I'm gonna turn teachers and librarians into storytellers. That's what I'd like to have happen.
Yeah.
And that's why I did workshops, and that's why I have created all these books. Every book I've created is because I saw some need for it. So at this point in my life, I'm just looking at what I've created that I haven't published, that maybe I should get published before it's too late. So I'm kind of putting those. So I had a whole pile of picture book manuscripts I was hoping to get sold as picture books that I haven't managed. I've got like 22 picture books published, but I've still got others that I was hoping to get published. So I've taken
another 20 or another 30 or another 40.
Yeah, I've taken some of those plus the Murray stories I worked up recently, and I've made a collection of 20 more tellable tales that I sent to August House, and then we'll see if they publish it or not. And I'm not sure whether to call it that or to call it something else, but anyway.
Well, then it could be long awaited, right? Because I think that first book, the 20 Tellable Tales, that was hugely popular. In fact, I know it was hugely popular. I don't think it at all. I know it was hugely popular. So for you to come out with the second one, how many years later? Then it's the much anticipated, the much anticipated second collection of 22 more tellable tales.
22, that's a good idea. I had 20. Maybe I could add in 2 more because I had to leave some out.
Well, my book that I put out, Ted Parkhurst did that through his Parkhurst brothers. And there was one really long story in there, and we had to take it out because the book would have been too long, apparently, which I was kind of sad about, but I was also okay about it. When you reflect on a story that you've been telling for a long time, do you find new discoveries about it?
No, I don't think so. Maybe I'm not that introspective between me and the story. Well, once I have the story, I'm kind of like wedded to it, and that's the story, and that's the way it goes. And I don't change them much over years. I tell them almost the same way for years and years and years. I'm still telling one of the first stories that I ever told. I'm still telling, still a favorite story.
But it's probably very different from the very first time that you've told it, right? Because it went through that whole morphing stage.
Yeah, but it settled down pretty quickly.
Okay.
Little Rooster, Diamond Button. I learned that one the first year that I was working as a librarian for King County. So I had only told the stories I told in class, which was a couple of short stories and then the Sooner Hound story. And I was buying books down at the Seattle Public Library, and I was in a room. They had all the books there. You could look at them. So King County librarians went down to look at the new books. Right. I was looking at the books, and over the partition, a librarian was telling stories to children, and I could hear her. And she told Little Rooster and the Turkish Sultan. And I went right back and started telling it. And I didn't find it for quite a several months later. I finally found the source. I just started telling it.
There are some stories like that. That just jump in your head and they just sit there. When you started all of this, when you started storytelling, I mean, you were at the forefront of the storytelling renaissance, I would imagine.
Yes.
Were there any
stories? I was very fortunate. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I was really fortunate because in those days, New York Public Library had a method of training for storytellers, and you were supposed to stand very still with your hands folded or calmly at your side and speak in well-modulated tones and without making gestures or jumping around or doing anything strange. And that was not the way I wanted to tell stories. And you were supposed to memorize them and then rehearse. And you weren't allowed to get out in front of children unless you were absolutely perfect. And they had, there were trainers in every library system that would train you, and they wouldn't let you go in front of the kids until you passed their thing and could do that. So you couldn't just go out and waddle around among the kids. You had to really be very good before you could do it. So that wasn't the way I wanted to tell, and it wasn't the way I wanted to learn. So, and I remember I was a coordinator of children's services for the a regional library system in California out of Sacramento. There were like nine counties that I drive around to and tell stories and help them with the collections. And I do workshops for them every month. And I had a storytelling workshop, and they came in and they were telling stories. And this one storyteller was actually from Nigeria. And she told her story. She was acting out the animals. She was jumping around and becoming a tiger, becoming a lion, or acting out the animals. And afterwards, one of the other librarians said to me, one of the supervising librarians said to me, "What can we do with her? How can we get her to tell stories properly?" Oh, no, she is so good. You want her to hold her hands tight and stop moving? I mean, this is, So anyway, so when I wrote 20 Tellable Tales, I said, this is blasphemy. I said, you can learn a story in 1 hour. And I described how you could learn a story in just 1 hour. Get out there and, do it. And it's just audience participation, how you can move. And it was totally going against everything had ever been taught by the New York Public Library. And those folks had actually infected the entire world. The Japanese tellers are telling that way. Everywhere where there are public libraries, they're telling the proper way that they were taught. But I was so fortunate. Marilyn E. Russo was in charge of storytelling at the New York Public Library at that time. And she reviewed my book for School Library Journal, and she gave it a positive review. Without that, I would still be nowhere. She really saved my bacon by approving of the book. And then the cat was out of the bag, and okay.
And what year was that?
When did it come out? I don't know. 1986.
Okay. So was the New York Library still doing that style of telling in the 80s? And that was pretty awesome. Yeah, and that was awesome of her to understand that there's got to be more than one way of telling stories, which of course there is. Yeah. And it came from a good place. It came from a caring for literature and to have literature reproduced accurately and really well for the children. It's just that
It wasn't a totally functional model.
Right.
No,
Yeah.
no.
Or sustainable.
And yeah, and it meant that not everybody could be telling stories, because
Right.
you had to really be perfect and memorize them and know them word for word. You couldn't change anything, and
Right.
and it made it impossible for someone who wasn't really skilled to be a storyteller.
Make it a lot easier for them with your technique.
Yeah. Yeah, and it doesn't matter if you're a good or bad storyteller. There's no bad storyteller. If you tell a story, you're a good storyteller. If you get it out of your mouth and they listen and they like it, yeah. I mean, I'm really not with this elitism about storytelling.
I hear you. I hear you. So if you were to meet a young storyteller today, what kind of advice would you give to them, knowing all the things that you know about what storytellers used to be like, and what storytelling has become, and children's literature has become these days?
Yeah, I tell them the same thing. I'll tell everyone that I teach, find a story keep looking until you find a story that you really love. You just said that you're my story. The story says you belong to me.
Yes, I think
And
that's,
when you find, yeah,
I think that's what it is, isn't it? The story finds
got
you.
you now. I got
Yeah,
you now.
right? They do. They totally do
Yeah.
that. They're sneaky.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And when
Well-
you find that story, just start telling it, and just keep telling it, and tell it to many different audiences. Tell it to everybody you can find to tell it to, because you get good only by practice and by doing it over and over again. It's like a stone rolling in a river. The story just rolls and rolls and rolls in your voice until finally it finds its perfect shape, and then you've got it.
That's so nice. I love that analogy. Yes, it's true. That's very true. It's like sea glass.
Yeah.
It's just a piece of broken
We have
glass
not-
until we work on it. That's a lovely analogy. Thank you for sharing that.
But here's a problem with sea glass.
Okay.
There is no more sea glass, because sea glass came from throwing your garbage into the ocean. And now we don't do that. And there's almost no sea glass on the beach anymore.
That's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
That's
So
a
if
very interesting
you don't have garbage, you don't have jewels.
It's true.
I don't know what that means.
I don't know what that means either. This means that the sea glass analogy is not a very good one. It's what it means. And we go back to the river and the rock in the river, because that's a good one. We'll stick with the rock. I like that. That's a good thought. But anyway, Margaret, I don't want to take up any more of your time. It's been wonderful to chit chat with you. There's one question that I do ask everybody though on my podcast, or most people, and it's a 3-part question. And it is: what is your favorite breakfast? Who would you eat that breakfast with? And where would you have that breakfast with that person?
Interesting. I don't really eat breakfast. If I had to eat breakfast,
That's 2 for 2.
if I had to eat breakfast, I would eat it with my family, especially Jenny and Nat, the storytelling couple that we mentioned, up on Guimas Island at our little round table, in looking out at the Sound and Mount Baker, assuming it was a lovely sunny day and Mount Baker was out.
That sounds nice. Margaret, thank you so much for being here with me. I so appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Before I go, I need to add a little something. Margaret sent me an email, and it stated, this is her message to me: I realise that I didn't completely answer your question about where I find my tales. Folks are often under the misconception that, because I travel so much, I am collecting stories as I go. I would never attempt hit-and-run folklore, but from time to time tellers ask me to please share tales from their culture. So, I have tales from Georgia, Caucasus, Thailand, Isan, Indonesia, Cuba, Borneo that come into my repertoire in that way, or that came into my repertoire that way. I am particularly grateful for a set of tales from Borneo, including The Singing Top, that were collected when a librarian friend asked me to please bring a tape recorder next time I came to Koto Kinabalu, as she had remembered tales her grandmother told. I think those tales had not been written down anywhere, not in English, not in Kadazan Dusun, not in Malay. Margaret continues saying, and I also worked with tellers from Cuba, Indonesia, Laos, Thailand, Argentina, Brazil and Saudi Arabia to solicit and edit folktale collections. In 10 traditional tellers, I interviewed 10 traditional storytellers and included 2 transcribed tales from each, along with their comments on storytelling. Folks might want to order that via interlibrary loan. Thanks, Margaret. This was a really interesting conversation, and it shows a different way of how people came into telling tales and their methods. Thanks for being here. There are so many other places that you could be, and it means a lot that you're listening to this. To help me with this podcast, you can become a patron at Patreon by paying anything from $1 for an episode that you enjoyed or a regular monthly subscription. In return, you get extras, early releases, and other exclusive content of my work. www.patreon.com/Simon Brooks. It takes around 4 hours or more to make each episode, not including getting in touch with folks and setting it all up, and the marketing before and after. I don't have advertisers. You can also donate on my website, simonbrooksstoryteller.com. And yes, that's me, Diamond Scree, the English fella and storyteller. I'm also on Instagram, Simon M. Brooks, and I'm also on Substack, and you can join me there as well. A shout out to Chris Jedd for creating and recording the music for me and my podcast. His band is called Blackpool Mecca. Once again, I hope you enjoyed the show, and be sure to check out other episodes that you might have missed. Cheers!